Good afternoon to those of you joining us in the UK, and good morning to those of you joining us in the USA. Welcome to this HFM Week webinar being held in conjunction with Capital Support on the topic of cybersecurity. Obviously an enormous topic for any hedge fund at the moment, what with the growing threat of cybersecurity and the growing regulatory focus on the issue. There have been a few fairly high-profile cases recently which have brought this subject right back to the fore. To discuss this topic today, we are delighted to welcome Marcus Lewis, Technical Director at Capital Support, and Simon Rosario, who is Chief Information Security Officer at Capital Support, who are going to run through a presentation for you on cybersecurity, where you are and where you should be. I would like to invite anyone in the audience to submit questions during the webinar, which will come through to me in the text box and which we will ask the panelists at the end. So with no further ado, Marcus and Simon, if you would like to take over and introduce yourselves, and we'll get started.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's attending. And good afternoon in the UK, and as you said, good morning in the US. Thanks to HFM Week for hosting the webinar. Simon and I will try and keep this fairly short and punchy if we can. You guys are all very busy. Initially we thought we'd give you a little background on myself and Simon. I've been in IT for almost 25 years. I've worked for large corporates such as General Motors and Nokia, and my recent role has taken me into looking after the alternative investment markets, and that's really where I'm going to be focusing this conversation on today.
Hi, my name's Simon, and I do work for Capital Support as the CISO. I've worked in security for about 20 years, both in the public sector, in central government with DWP, and also in the local authorities, and also in the private sector with BT, Nortel, other various other organizations. I'm also, for my sins, a qualified lead auditor for ISO 27001.
Cybersecurity has become pretty much a media buzzword, and as a result, every man and his dog has really had some sort of cybersecurity offering and wants to get their 2 cents worth in. What we're going to try and do through the next sort of 15 or 20 minutes is give you an idea of how to travel that path, really where to start, and to put together how to put together your roadmap into understanding and delivering a cybersecurity strategy. I guess sorry, technical hit. Okay, so nicely moving on to the next slide smoothly. As I suggested, everybody has an opinion in cybersecurity. They've got an opinion, they've got a need, they've got a solution. Investors were demanding to know about what the security solution is. IT providers are wanting you to spend your hard-earned money on their solutions. But in the essence of it, if you break it down, really, security is just about risk, and it's managing that risk. And it's your risk, and you can choose where and how much effort you need to put into that risk. And it's not just about technology. It's probably about people and process too. In fact, not probably, it is about people and process too. Rather than sort of going into the demystification of everything, we're just going to talk through some of that process of getting from understanding where you need to be through to delivering what can manage and prioritize that risk management. So Simon, look, to kick off with, can you give us an example of some sort of misconceptions around cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, people normally see cybersecurity as a new threat, and it's good. The media has blown this up, so people are now doing something about it. Organizations are looking at cybersecurity, saying, "Oh, right, okay, security." But if you strip away the cyber bit, security has always been there. But for security professionals like myself, I think that's very good. It's a good talking point. So some people are starting to look at security and do something about it. But we still find, or I still see, a lot of our clients are doing nothing because they don't really know where to start. Some see cybersecurity as a third party or an IT issue. Some come to me and say, right, okay, how do I fix this? Have you got a box or a piece of software that will fix cybersecurity? People need to understand, like you said, Marcus, it's all about risk. And relevant where they are, it doesn't matter. So we need to say, where do we start? So this is often a good place to start from.
Okay, so I guess in order to understand your risks, you need to really see where and how to get on that road. And we see it as three simple stages. To start with, it's about where do you need to be? Understand the goals. Secondly is then understanding where you are at the moment. And then once you have those two elements, you can draw the line between and measure the gaps. So yeah, it's really understanding the goals, understanding where you are, and filling those gaps.
Hi, Martin. Can you just expand a bit more on what you mean by understanding the goals?
Okay, so nicely prompted inconveniently in a pre-arranged question. I'll move on to the next slide, which is really about drivers, and those are the goals, if I'm honest. It's about what the key drivers are to your risk. Once you know the drivers, that will pretty much dictate where you need to get to, and therefore clearly your set of goals. So the first primary driver really is reputation, your business risk, and there's been clearly a lot of public and press noise around any sort of risks and breaches that have come to light. And any business, particularly in the financial world, reputation is absolutely key. Secondly, and this is probably the noise that we're seeing the most at the moment, it's about investors. Investors are no longer ignoring security. They are demanding that their the funds and the companies that they're investing in demonstrate that they have a clear and understood IT and specifically a security strategy. And then finally, it's about compliance and regulation. So there are various levels in different countries and different regions. For our US friends and some of our UK guys, the SEC is very important. Particularly the SEC is pertinent to us at the moment because they're kind of the only governing body, the only regulator who's come out with a very clear, defined set of rules. And they did that a couple of years ago. They tweaked them recently, and they've even started to fine companies now. So that's the driver, together with the investors. It's really, for me, it's becoming the clear goal. Once you understand what you need to deliver for that, that allows you then to track back and work out what you need to do for it.
So we understand the goals, the drivers. But, okay, let's take an example of a recent incident that happened. The data loss within TalkTalk. Can you demonstrate from that is how the drivers of the goals were aligned to this?
Okay, so TalkTalk, I'm assuming our friends in the US have seen some noise around this, but in summary, about last October, they had a data breach and lost some of their client data, their customer data. In fact, it was 4% of the data was released. As a result, they lost 100,000 customers in Q3 last year. Their share price dropped about 30%, and dropped by 30%, and it still has yet to fully recover. And in total, the cost of the hack was £42 million. So in terms of relating that to drivers, reputation's right up there. So reputation to investors, having faith in the company to be able to deliver and perform what they do. Secondly, it's about reputation for their customers. Customers no longer have faith that they're going to be able to look after their data. And then back to the investors. You know, if a business can't do what it wants, they're not going to have investors, and investors are going to put the share price. The 42 million is going to come straight off the bottom line, and that means less money to be shared out to the shareholders. So yeah, pretty much fairly clear lines there. And finally, there's a little bit of governance. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK has given them a fixed penalty, and next year that could be, it wasn't too high, but next year that could be really high for some people because it becomes a percentage of revenue, no longer than fixed fees. So yeah.
Okay, so now that we know the goals, so what's next?
Well, in true preparedness and prompting, thank you. We kind of you know where you want to be. So where are you now, and what do you need to do to understand where you are now? So there's some depending on the complexity of your organisation, the effort and energy will be different, but the principles remain the same. Assess and audit where you are, flag what the risks are, do an analysis between where you are and where you want to be, and that will give you your roadmap to prioritise. It's not a complicated thing to consider. It probably requires a little bit more effort, and for the larger companies, they will have people who are experienced, or they can hire people in to do this. For the smaller ones, it's going to be a bit more of a challenge, but you know, it isn't overly complicated. It's just understanding the compliance and regulation needs, aligning a yardstick, using something like ISO 27001 or the SEC guidelines to understand where you need to be, working with your technology provider or your in-house IT teams, and then producing a risk matrix that can align to where your goals were. So we know where we are, we know where we want to be. My prompt for you is, to move on to the next slide, is how do we get there?
Yeah, you're quite right. We need to put a roadmap together. We need to understand what we're trying to protect, what are the drivers, and why do we need to do it. You can use risk tools or even simple spreadsheets to capture the risk, and depending on your drivers, you can start capturing the risk formulated from the SEC and the ISO 27001. This will give you the first list of risks and with risk scores, any high and medium you would like to mitigate against, any low ones you would like to accept.
I'm going to interrupt you a sec there. So you're talking about risk, but what do you mean by risk? Because for some that means one thing, for others a different one. Can you give me an example of what you mean by risk?
Yeah, so within security, I mean risk, I think people understand the concept of risk in the sense of you have to look at your threat, and then you look at the vulnerability. So within vulnerability, you look at the impact.
Okay, so you're talking as an auditor. So for our audience and me, and trying to keep it simple, when you see a risk or a threat, what? Give me an example of what you mean by that.
So threats could be, say, theft by staff or from third party, or it could be a technical threat by unauthorized access or denial of service. You know, there's a whole list of threats. You could go through that, making sure that we're all compliant.
So what you're saying is, in order to sort of put a plan together to fix those holes, if you can identify what those risks can be, and that could be the people, the process, or the technology, yeah, exactly. Then once you've got that, and then that, as you say, it could be simple as putting together a spreadsheet with a done, not done tick box.
Absolutely. That identifies your gap analysis, your weaknesses, and saying where it is. And that leads on. I mean, let's look at some examples then, Marcus.
Okay, so that's probably a good idea. We do have a couple of examples of a couple of companies that have been through this process, almost sort of exactly how we've described. They've considered where they needed to be, and they've considered where they are, and then they've put the gap together. So the first example, we're using a global PE house, multiple locations across the globe, about 500 staff, significantly large pot of cash that they manage for others, and they recognized a couple of years ago that there were risks within their business, within their security, not just technology, but also within their people, that they needed to address. They took some guidance initially on how to approach this, and out of that they chose to get a third party in to do a full audit. They went to PwC. They performed an end-to-end audit, not just within their own businesses and locations, but also they went to their primary suppliers, from their IT suppliers to software vendors to people who manage some of their monies. And they did an audit right away across the board. Out of that, they then took what I would say was a fairly hefty report with 65 key risks, and each of those key risks then had subsections underneath them. So it was a very comprehensive, and I might say expensive, report. They took the report and decided that they really needed some outside help to interpret it. they took on a CISO to oversee the process. The information security officer then advised that a steering group with key stakeholders from the C-level down got involved, and they went through the risks and prioritized them. They took that as their agenda, and they then demonstrated to the board that they had a plan and a budget that they wanted to stick to and move forward. That was a couple of years ago. They've now probably about 70% of the way through that, and they're a significantly different place. Culture has changed. Everybody within the business is aware of security, and their technology has changed. Some of it has been just part of a natural tech refresh and life cycle change. Some of it has been very deliberate. They've gone out and bought specific technologies to meet some of the risks. Their drivers were really around investors and a little bit of compliance too. So a complex process that's taken a long time, but it's gone through those basic principles. They established what they needed to do and where they needed to be. They then took it where they were at the moment, and then they used that gap to identify the process and the risk. So moving into a slightly smaller solution, that one of our clients came to us and said, look, cybersecurity is a bit of a pain at the moment. We're hearing it all over the news. Our investors are starting to talk about it. In fact, more importantly, our investors are starting to ask about it. And they're starting to ask for very specific questions. So in terms of what they did is their compliance officer worked with an IT partner. In this case, it was us. And we did a baseline. We took some understanding of where they were. And we did it from an independent view. We didn't go in and say, your technologies need to spend some money so we can leverage it. We did it from a point of view that really held up on its own from an independent value, so that they could see that it wasn't about spend, it was about doing the right thing to achieve their goal, and their goal was about making sure that investors were happy and they protected the reputation and security of their business. They used the SEC as the guidelines because they felt that was most akin to what they wanted to deliver. The FCA have yet to produce anything that is comprehensive enough to use. So with the SEC guidelines, and they produced a gap analysis. They understood the risk. They chose to ignore some. They chose to adopt some quick wins, as I've mentioned in the slide, some partial policies, some regular independent pen tests. They changed a bit of culture. They did a bit of security awareness training. But for the technology change, they decided to do it over a 3-year roadmap. So rather than spending the buck now, what they chose to do was say, look, we've got some changes coming up. Some of our technology is becoming end of life. Let's do it then. But what they did is they wrote it down and they put it in a security book. And now when investors come in, they can present back to them and say, hey guys, this is where we are with our security and this is what we plan on doing. And as a result, they're getting less complex and deep dive questions because they didn't have the answers initially. And they'll be able to present back to their investors in a comprehensive and a mature way. So two slightly different approaches, but both with a similar outcome. With the hedge fund, the spend was quite low. I think we worked it out. It was only about a 5 or 10% uplift each year on their spend to achieve quite a considerable gain. So yeah, absolutely. Two good examples, I think, of how to achieve it. Look, sorry, my button's not working again. There we go. So hopefully over the last sort of 15, 20 minutes, you guys have just had a little grasp of really the process that we use and we recommend to others on how to achieve their security credibility and security strategy. Cyber's part of that, but it's not exclusive. What's really important is the people and process. The technology is important, but it's not essential. You can do many things without using the technology side of things. It's about training, it's about awareness. So what are the key takeaways for me? Understanding your drivers. Really get a good grasp on what are you trying to achieve through cybersecurity. If you start going straight into technology, straight from the beginning and go, I need to get a better firewall, I need to get better email services, it's the wrong approach. You might already have that in place. Understand what you're trying to do. What are the drivers? So reputational drivers, investors, and also governance, the SEC, the FCA, etc. So once you've got that, really it's then down to where are you at the moment? What's the line in the sand? Do the basic audit, understand your risks, and then it allows you to measure that gap, and that's that final piece in the puzzle, allows you to prioritize those risks, and from there you will build your roadmap. Simon, for you, key takeaways in this topic?
I think for me it's like everything. Doing nothing is not acceptable. I think if you get the regulators or even the investor asking a question and not being able to show something for it, it would put you in the back foot. So yeah, what I'll do is start small and build up. Know your clear drivers and where you're going to meet.
So when you say do nothing is the wrong thing, doing nothing is the wrong thing, what you're saying is invite the attendees to the capital support to spend lots of money and see if we can help them out.
No, they don't have to spend any money. They just have to contact us. I mean, we offer free services. We offer advice. Go into your blog post. But obviously, if they need consultancy work or other sort of work,
sounds slightly in cheek, of course. But what I guess what we're saying is you don't need to have an experienced technology firm to help them. No. So you can start off with some basics. Things like checking your password policy, making sure you don't leave stuff lying around, doing a little bit of due diligence on your staff, having the cleaner, making sure they're financially checked, that sort of stuff. Yeah, it doesn't need anybody to come in and help them do it. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, fantastic. Thanks everybody for listening. We're now have an opportunity to have a bit of Q&A. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions. Violet, you there?
Yeah, I am. Great. Thank you very much, guys, for that presentation. A couple of questions have come through, so we'll kick off with the first one. Just while I'm asking questions, I'd like to remind the audience that you can still ask questions in the text box on the right-hand side of your screen. They'll come through to me. I'll be happy to put them to the panel. But Simon and Marcus, there was a quick question I wanted to put to you around the regulatory side. That's come through. So the SEC has been incredibly hot on cybersecurity for the last 2 years. It's already brought one enforcement action against a US-based manager, and according to its director of enforcement, there are another few enforcement cases in the pipeline related to the cybersecurity practices of investment advisors. Can I get a sense from you on a bit more where the FCA is with this, and whether the FCA is catching up to the SEC in terms of perhaps its aggression towards cybersecurity scrutiny?
Okay, that's a really good question, and one I was hoping I wasn't going to be asked. If I'm honest, I think probably on certainly on a monthly basis for the past 2 years, and at times on a weekly basis, I've tried to engage with the FCA and have done on numerous occasions about this, and they've done a lot of good work about provider due diligence, and they've done a lot of good work about choosing a partner, and they've talked around that. But the current, and forgive me if it's changed in the last week, but the current feeling is they've yet to really put their feet in the water and their stamp and mark on the table to say, this is what you guys need to be doing, which is one of the reasons why we use the SEC guidelines as our yardstick. It's not a very good answer, I'm afraid, to a very good question, and it's a question that we ask regularly, and we ask our clients as well, who may have different ears to the ground than the FCA. Ultimately, I think that they're going to come out. UK Gov are doing a lot of things around that. They've got the Cyber Essentials and Essentials Plus, which is the important one. They're starting to talk about good practice. They're inviting businesses to get involved and get accredited. But also, and the Cyber Essentials, incidentally, the Cyber Essentials Plus is quite a robust process to go through. We did it earlier this year, and it is quite aggressive. They look at a lot more than the ISO 27000. ISO 27001 is about process. SEC is a little bit about process and about how you do things and demonstrating you're doing the right things. Cyber Essentials is really about the nuts and bolts. And if you pass it, you really do demonstrate that you've got very clean technology security. But it is about the technology. In answer to the right question, I don't know. We keep asking the question. The feeling is something is imminent. I suspect that we'll probably see something early next year.
I think it'll be in the same lines as the SEC. I think they'd normally follow one another. So if what we're telling our clients is prepare or align yourself with the SEC, so you won't be caught out there.
Yeah, SEC is a good starting place, but until we know, whoever, it's the FDA.
Terrific. Okay, well, thanks, guys. There's another question that's come through on an equally contentious but separate issue, the issue of cyber insurance. So in the US, anecdotally, there is some evidence that larger managers are taking cyber insurance policies, but there are some issues around it. There are some issues around the pricing of the product, the number of providers offering it, and the actual risk that it covers. And the reputational risk specifically that it is perceived not to cover. Do you guys have a view at all on cyber insurance, whether investors are asking for it, what sort of comfort it provides to investors if a hedge fund has cyber insurance?
It's another good question. So we're seeing a little bit from the investors, but it's more in a have you considered it way rather than you must have it way. What we have found is generally people are self-insuring at the moment. They're spending the money on protection. They're spending the money on redundancy. They're putting things in place that can try and reduce the risk. But they also are putting pots of money to the side to self-insure. Out of I think probably 50 or 60 guys that I was talking to earlier in the year, all in the same industry, and the same topic came up. There wasn't anybody in the room who'd signed on the dotted line for cyber insurance. However, having talked to a number of people recently in the insurance industry, this is something that they are challenged with themselves. They're having difficulties defining what it is. They're having difficulty in where the buck stops. If you just to use a very crude example, if you have something which a staff then clicks on and causes a breach, where does the liability lie? Is it on the individual member of staff, which it shouldn't be, of course? Is it on the fact that if you didn't do the training, that then it becomes the company's responsibility? Or is it the fact that something's just been breached, therefore that can invoke the insurance? It's a real big challenge for the insurance companies to define this. There are some early starters in the industry who have just thrown stuff out there, and the challenge will come when they have to invoke that policy, and then we'll see whether it stands up or not. I think it's very early age in the marketplace. It's going to take another couple of years to mature. It's a very good question, and one that appears to be, at the moment, the answer is people are generally self-insuring, but there are one or two exceptions where people are adopting some insurance policies.
I think also insurance companies, because it's very new, they don't really understand it. What they're looking for is looking at, have your third party, have you done your due diligence against your third parties, making sure. So one of the things they will ask for from a due diligence point of view is your IT provider is ISO 27001, right? Because that's how they can engage, is how seriously they take things, so that they can then reduce that liability slightly. So
I think to finish on it, I'm very comfortable working in the IT world. I would be very nervous trying to put together an IT policy for an insurance broker or an insurance firm for this type of cyber insurance. Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's a good question. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, guys. I wanted to turn to another question that's come in. Something that your presentation flagged up is the people risk, so the internal controls around staff and breaches that occur through weaknesses in training, perhaps. Can I ask you guys to give us some specific examples of people risk? And in a two-pronged question, can I also ask if you have any recommendations around training for staff on cybersecurity?
Yeah, okay. So something that, we consider is like theft. So say, for example, a member of staff leaving the organization, people they think, oh, because they've got it, they can then download it or send it via email. How do you control that? Again, it's intellectual property rights goes into that. You've got also things like accidental or somebody being duped into clicking on a link that they've got, or they think that was an email that was sent to them. So we always constantly being, these are sort of incidents that happen within capital support. I can talk about. So yeah, going back to what you just said, is like, how do we overcome or mitigate that? And yeah, training is the key thing. You have to train your staff. One of the things we do as part of our process is as soon as a member of staff joins the organization, they have a induction security awareness, and then follow down within the 2 weeks, we do a online training for them. So that not only that they have understood it, we then have a little quiz making sure they answer the correct question.
I think so. There's a number of aspects within people. There's the people risk in terms of deliberate, and there's the accidental risk. So doing things by accident, the clicking on something. The other thing is culture, really, and the culture, from our experience, works best when it's from the C-level down. If it's seen from the top that the security is considered important and the assets that you're protecting are valuable, that tends to move across the culture of the company. We found that people are often surprised that that their staff who were loyal and keen workers and successful for them for 10 years have left and happen to have taken a copy of their client database or their particularly clever spreadsheet, whatever, with them. And I guess they then look to see how that they can at least audit that to allow them to understand how to put some processes in place to fix it. Really, it's training. Training and security awareness. There's lots of different ways of doing it. We do it through web-based training. We tried the classroom technique. It didn't work. We found that people weren't as engaged as we'd like. But using the classroom technique, the online technique, they have a series of slides and information and questions they have to go through. They're quizzed at the end. It became a competitive thing within the company, and the output was very positive. And not only that, we repeat the exercise and increase the pass mark. But in all honesty, the people aspect is probably almost a bigger challenge than the technology, because you can always, with the right budgets, you can find technology to resolve your problem. But fixing people is much harder. Getting them to change their practices. Just simple things like getting them to lock screens when they leave their desk. Stop leaving things around on the desktop, which is, on their desk that's printed out that has confidential material. Those are really big challenges, and it's starting with culture from the top, encouraging people to do it, regular, repeated conversations around it, and also try not to make it too boring. When you talk about security training, everybody glazes over, and it's just trying to make that a little bit more dynamic. It's easy for us to say we're in the industry, but it's finding time as well. So yeah, the people, the challenge around it, the training is a challenge for a lot of companies. But just start off with the basics, encourage the culture, and I think that's probably the best advice we can give for that.
I think the other thing is we've got to change things. Like you said, I mean, we recently did the phishing campaign. Yeah. So that had a very good effect. So where we thought, no, nobody's going to click on the link. We had a few. So that's a positive thing. So we learn from these mistakes. So going forward, awareness training, different aspects, different processes.
Yeah, culture and leading from the top, I think, is probably a good summary. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, guys. I want to move on to what investors are asking about cybersecurity. You have alluded to this a lot in your presentation. Can you give us a sense of any of the specifics that investors are starting to go into when they're looking at a hedge fund cybersecurity policies?
I guess we get asked that more than any other question. What are other people being asked? Specifically, it's around their, I guess, what's your security policies? What are your access controls? What's your physical security within your building? What's your business continuity plan? Do you have an incident response? Back to the people, what's your security awareness training? It's about what are you doing and how are you working with your provider if it's outsourced to ensure that you're effective. And this is the key one, how can you demonstrate it? And that's the question that often comes out from investors is, please demonstrate what you do to achieve all this. What we're finding now is the ATEC questionnaire, some of you who are listening may be familiar with it, is coming in quite a lot. That's being passed straight on to us to fill out. and to help, not fill out directly, but I guess work with our clients to fill out. There are other sort of, due diligence coming in. We're starting to see quite comprehensive. 2 years ago the question would be, tell us about your security. Now it's probably got 200 questions specifically around the physical security, business continuity plan, all those kind of things. So we're being asked very much to demonstrate. The questions are all roughly, they morph and change, the semantics change, but they're around the same thing. But it's about being able to demonstrate it. And then if they drill into each element, they want to be able to demonstrate that. And that's what our clients are struggling with a little bit, is being able to pass that demonstration on. So we help them with it. Others, I guess, do very similar things. It's about being prepared for the questions so that then the additional questions don't come.
Okay, thanks guys. I wanted to turn to another issue that seems to be developing, and that's the issue of ransomware. This is not something that any of the regulatory authorities have really taken a view on either side of the pond. But ransomware, where bits of your network are hacked and sensitive information is stolen and then held to ransom, do you guys take a view on what a hedge fund should do in that situation? Should it pay the ransom or should it not? As I said, the regulators haven't really taken a stance on that, neither have the authorities in the US. Is it something that you guys have a view on at all?
Well, not only we have a view, we have an experience of it too. We had there was an incident a few months back, actually probably before Christmas, for an office that I will say that we didn't look after. We were asked to help around, and they had a crypto locker. Their server was encrypted, and a ransom was requested. Unfortunately, this particular client, and this has since changed, weren't backing up that data, and they had two choices. They lost the data, or they had to pay the ransom. The loss of data would have been incredibly frustrating and probably expensive in terms of time and effort to recover. So they chose to pay the ransom. It was very carefully managed, but they paid the ransom. It was $500. It was paid. And they considered it a cheap solution rather than having to spend tens of thousands to try and recover the data. It's very difficult. There's a sort of honor amongst thieves that if you pay the ransom, they will give you the data back. Because if you think about it, if you didn't pay it back, if you didn't give them the data back, nobody would ever pay the ransoms again. So there has to be some sort of honor system going on there, bizarrely as it is, even though they're holding you to ransom. However, in fact, the FBI have even said, you know what, guys, pay the ransom. But there are also views that says it's encouraging terrorism, it's funding terrorism, it's encouraging, this illegal activity. And if you pay the ransom, it will encourage people to do it even more and find more sophisticated ways to hold you to ransom. So I think the answer is really simple, case by case. I don't know what you, Simon.
No, I think it's case by case, but again, it goes back to what we said. You have to have good backups, test your backups, make sure you got restores, and that's it. And then you can say how long it takes you to restore it back. That's the only solution. So we've had a number of other clients who've been hit with this ransomware, and they just restored it back without having to pay. But yeah, there's an out of service impact to that. Prevention is the best cure, of course. And putting the backups in place, making sure your security perimeters are well protected. But that takes time, effort, and money. And until you get to that point, then do some basics and make sure that you can try and get your backups right. Do the usual, the usual important factors. But at the time, you're going to have to take a view. And I think there's no right or wrong answer. There's some moral decisions to be made. But ultimately, it's about protecting your business. And if you need to spend the $500, the $1,000, the $2,000, whatever it is to do that, you might have to make that call.
Terrific. Thank you very much, guys. I wanted to ask now a quick question on vendor due diligence and just how you have seen the due diligence of vendors by hedge funds change, whether it has changed at all. Obviously, you have things like the ATEC DDQ, which has gathered a lot of momentum since it was launched. Can I get a sense from you on how hedge fund due diligence of their vendors is changing, and whether you have any kind of best practice guide for how hedge funds should approach vendor due diligence.
So it's an interesting question. The market has definitely changed. It's changed in a number of ways. First of all, we're seeing less startups. So those sort of questions that come from that side of the market weren't always overly comprehensive. Although with the likes of the ATEC DDQ and stuff, that's sort of helping that side of the market a little bit. We're seeing the larger funds now becoming more mature around security, and as a result, their DDQs to us are becoming very comprehensive. We've had a number of opportunities in the last sort of 6 months where not only have they come to us with a very comprehensive list of DDQs, they've come to inspect us, they've come to inspect our people at our office, they've done some background checks on where needed. They've gone to our data centers. We found that they've asked to run some pen tests before they've even become a client, or they've asked to see us evidence that and demonstrate that we've done it. We have an independent test each year done by Intuitus. It's a very comprehensive test with a series of, I guess, interrogations, for want of a better phrase, that we produce in order to help with this. But yeah, it's becoming more and more in-depth and intelligent, I think is probably the right word. Our clients are definitely getting more astute at asking the technical and security questions.
Yeah, I think that they're certainly asking the right sort of questions. They're demanding that third parties are got some sort of certification, accreditation. So having the ISO 27001 is a plus sign. And also that now they were looking at what Marcus said about the Cyber Essential Plus, where they can see these are the standards that it's going to give you that credibility that their information or their data is being stored securely.
Actually, that's a really good point. The accreditation side is something that we are almost ineligible a couple of years ago when we didn't have our ISO 27001 to some of the elements that we are putting proposals for now and have won because we not purely because of the ISO, but certainly that's a factor that we wouldn't have been able to tender for some of the business because we wouldn't have the badge. And what's interesting about ISO is we're seeing people putting it on their literature and marketing themselves as Cyber Essentials or ISO 27001. And actually, ISO 27001 covers a lot of areas. And sometimes it's just the data center which has got the ticket, whereas in fact the people in the process and the business haven't got it. And when you're doing your due diligence, these are the questions that we're starting to see asked. They said, oh yeah, we know you've got ISO 27001, but that's your data center. What about you? And they go, well, actually for us it's okay. And it's the same with Cyber Essentials. There's two Cyber Essentials. There's Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Cyber Essentials is literally filling in a piece of paper and sending off a form, but it gives you a Cyber Essentials badge. If you get the Plus, as I've alluded to earlier and talked about earlier, it's much more comprehensive. And we're seeing now that people are asking these questions and they want to know, and they know about it as well. You can't just give them a flavor. You have to be comprehensive and knowledgeable in your answers. And in answer to your question about, do we have packs and stuff that help people? Absolutely. We have investor packs for our existing clients. We help them put them together. And for potential new clients, we are happy to answer these questions, and because we've been going through quite a lot of them recently, it's becoming the norm. Particularly from some of the big bank-backed funds, we're seeing that that's getting very comprehensive, and we're putting together some of that guidance around that. And we're happy to give people any guidance as well if walking through the sort of questions they should be asking providers like ourselves.
Terrific. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. That answers all the questions that have come through from the audience. Are there any final points either of you wish to make at this stage?
Other than just saying thank you very much to everybody. Thanks for listening to Simon and I talk to each other for the last 3 quarters of an hour or so. I guess for me, it's just the 3 key pillars: people, process, and technology. You can't just focus on one, you have to focus on all 3. Understand where you are, understand where you want to be, find the gap, and hopefully your cybersecurity worries will be a little bit easier.
Yeah. And for me, like I said, you've got my contact details. Just drop us a line if you need any help or assistance.
Okay. Great, yeah, fantastic, thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much to all of our attendees for joining us for this webinar today. Marcus and Simon's details are on the slide in front of you, and the full recording of this webinar will be on the HFM Week website shortly. With that, I'd like to wrap it up. So thank you very much to Marcus and to Simon, and thanks again to all of you for attending.